Yes, our top stories tonight. The first pictures emerge of President Mugabe since he was detained nearly 48 hours ago. He's in crunch talks with South African envoys and Zimbabwe's top military figures. We have a live report coming up from Harare and full analysis. South African people, South African officials there as well. Why is South Africa important in all of this?
South Africa's role will always be important. And besides, David, we have spoken about this before. South Africa shares a border with Zimbabwe. South Africa shares a culture with Zimbabwe. South Africa shares the background with Zimbabwe. South Africa and Zimbabwe were technically one country until 1920. When the colonial masters at the time did a referendum and divided the country along the Limpopo River. So if there's a problem in Zimbabwe, you are rest assured that 90% of what will become refugees will cross into South Africa.
Okay.
Or even the ex-vice president would have been comfortable in South Africa at the time.
Well, as if by magic, John Cookson has left us, our chief correspondent, and in the seat now, a co-founder of the APRI think tank, Lloyd Sipa. Lloyd, thank you for sparing the time to come and speak to us. I've been speaking to you outside the studio, of course, and you're one of those, I mean, I was putting it to you a little bit earlier. This is an army coup. We see all the headlines internationally saying just that. But you're one of those calling it a realignment intervention. Could one explain or flesh that out a bit?
I mean, look at those pictures that are coming out. Right. Could that possibly be a coup?
That's what we're saying here.
As from the beginning, I say, look, if you look at the statement the generals made, it was addressed to President Mugabe as the first secretary of ZANU-PF, asking him to fix the things in his party. And so the issue of a coup does not arise because they have a long-standing relationship going back to the War of Liberation. And the army has always been the custodian of the politics in ZANU-PF. So it's custom. It's a tradition that the military intervenes whenever you get what you call them counter-revolutionaries interfering with the party.
And this is all serious infighting, factional infighting within ZANU-PF.
It's infighting for the values. You see, it's the army simply saying, look, the party must realign itself with the values of the struggle.
Yeah. Where does this picture, or these pictures that we've been looking at over the past 20 minutes or so, where does this leave Emmerson Mnangagwa?
If I look at those pictures, from what I gather from those pictures, a deal has been struck. Right. There's a deal there. Right. If I take a shot in the dark, Emmerson Mnangagwa was dismissed unprocedurally. No due process was followed. Because if you're going to dismiss someone of the status of a vice president, you have to get, the usual tenets of law. If you accuse, you must prove, right? So this guy was dismissed overnight. He wasn't given a hearing, and from what I gather, he didn't even receive a letter that he has been fired. He read it in the papers. So technically, Mnangagwa is still ZANU-PF. Right. Mnangagwa is still a member of ZANU-PF.
Has he tonight got any reason to worry?
I don't think so, because when I look at those pictures, I'm thinking what has happened there is that they've agreed that whatever happened, Mugabe wasn't supervising that. That was probably done in the back doors. It was done unprocedurally. So Mnangagwa is in ZANU-PF. Those pictures tell me that they've reached an arrangement of some sort, and Mnangagwa looks like he's back.
And that arrangement would not include Robert Mugabe going into exile anywhere?
No, I mean, look at the general smiling. What that means is that, you see, those guys have a long history. They've come a long way. And you could actually put Mnangagwa as number 3 over there because they've looked after each other in the struggle. Mnangagwa is likely to get back his vice presidency post and probably see Mugabe out. Mugabe has probably negotiated his exit package as we speak, his family package, and to give him that elder statesman, stand off. That is probably what has happened there.
What would he be? What would his titular role be?
Mugabe is your equivalent of South Africa's Mandela, and there was a time when they were competing on who is the better statesman. See, Mugabe has been, you see, if you've read the Machiavellian books, you find that Mugabe has been a real astute politician in Southern Africa. He is respected across Africa. And for that, SADC, even the Troika, even Zuma himself, you know, would want to make sure that Mugabe gets a, you know, a proper send-off, not to be hounded down like a criminal.
I'd like to, that's interesting, I'd like to put to both of you some words that have been appearing in various forms, in various newspapers here in the West internationally. This is a sample. For decades, Robert Mugabe has clung on to power by bribing, torturing and murdering his opponents. Now, as Zimbabweans and Africans, would you buy into that, or would you tend to look at it a completely different way?
I personally wouldn't buy into that, because I'm also a product of that liberation struggle. I was born in a family of the struggle. What has been happening is that, see, when a party is infiltrated by counter-revolutionaries, it's standard 4. The standards fall to such a point where the corruption, the bribery, and everything start happening. The reason why Mugagawa happened in 1975 is because ZANU-PF had got to that stage where the values of the struggle had been completely abandoned. They were selling out, you had counter-revolutionaries, and they were weeded out. And same thing with the Nara Rebellion, when Frolies was trying to, you know, overthrow the leader. Same thing happened, and this is another example of the army coming to restore, you know, ethics in ZANU-PF, which have always been there.
And that's what was confusing me. You and I have been chatting about this quite a lot, and yesterday I threw a question at you, and I'm just trying to flesh it out tonight. This situation where your family suffered very badly in Matabeleland, where up to 20,000 people were massacred, the 5th Brigade involved, and all the rest of it, and reports suggest that it went to the very top. The architect at the very top was Robert Mugabe at the end of the day, and Emerson and Mnangagwa at the same time, the two of them. But you still have good words to say about Robert Mugabe, so the complexion of things as far as you're concerned psychologically and your perspective is very different from the Western perspective, and it's a very interesting perspective you have.
No, it is simply the realization that when you deal with a problem, when you deal with the reality of what actually happened in the past, you will be having facts. And those facts will go back to point to the cabinet that sat at the time, not an individual within it, but whatever the collective decision that would have been taken by that cabinet. So the way that we have always looked at it is, this is a national problem that needs to be known about. After that, it needs to be addressed in terms of addressing what happened, but without necessarily isolating an individual. Because if you isolate an individual member of an entire cabinet, you lose the ability to deal with that issue beyond the availability of that individual. So that, to me and others, remains a national problem, a problem that Zimbabwe needs to sort out. But it's not something that will be isolated to Robert Mugabe as an individual or any other minister who would have been there at the time. But to say, here is a decision that was made, and here are the solutions that the people who are victims believe will actually help the nation going forward.
Would you, both of you, would you accept in any shape or form that Robert Mugabe has been instrumental in causing deep misery to ordinary Zimbabweans?
Well, there are different ways. If I speak as a journalist, I speak to people that say the people in Mashonaland in particular benefited from Robert Mugabe for years, his education policies and all the other things. They would take things for granted. You speak to some white people who would say he did reconciliation, which was the first time such a thing was done in Africa, and looked after them until 1997, and then their language from that time changes. If you speak to people from where I come from, they are yet to have anything to look at as having been positive through the process. But don't blame an individual, but blame a system, and see what was done by whatever government in place is a government that would have been following a certain plan that was in place.
Lloyd, the plan for that caused hyperinflation?
Well, when I look at Mugabe's legacy, it's a mixed bag, you know, good and bad. The good things that he's done, something that the rest of Africa respect him for, is addressing the land imbalance. That on itself, most African countries have failed to do that, South Africa included. See, that goes down as one of his good legacies. But at the same time, when you institute a revolution, like a land revolution, the economy ultimately suffers because agricultural output. Zimbabwe has been an agri-based economy for a long time. Yeah. So when you touch the land, effectively, you've touched you know, the heartbeat of the economy. So that ultimately resulted in the, you know, economic downturn. So obviously, you take that, you know, the good, and this is the outcome of a, you know, a good initiative.
Do you think that, and accepting that, do you think that over the next few weeks or so, when things change, whatever happens with Robert Mugabe, something else will be put in place, and that something else will improve things for ordinary Zimbabwe?
You see, one thing Zimbabweans will probably learn from out of all this is that we have now come to understand the mistakes we've made in the past. We will never invest power in an individual. Doesn't matter where it is. Zimbabwe will start growing its institutions. You see, the Mugabe, when Zovo and everybody else were busy amending the constitution to give Mugabe executive powers, he was a fantastic man. Yeah. You know, you'd stop in the street and throw a coin in a bowl for somebody who's sitting on a street corner. That was Mugabe then. The moment he got the executive powers, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts more so. He's a human being. Yeah. Is not infallible. He will eventually enjoy the power to a point where he will abuse it. Yeah. So what Zimbabweans are learning from all this is that we start building up our institutions such that the president, when we refer to the presidency, we're not referring to an individual, we're referring to an office.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, let's look at those pictures yet again, because they're still highly relevant and will be over the next couple of days. Absolutely extraordinary, a bit of a surprise, rather obviously, today. And there he is, Robert Mugabe. And certainly in the Western press, we've been talking about the army being involved in a military coup. But there he is, standing there quite happily with one of the people, the generals who engendered, who set up that coup. So Tam, just before we end it, looking at these pictures, can one interpret where this goes from here?
Well, the presence of the Defense Minister, Sidney Sekaramai, who has worked with Emmerson Mnangagwa for a very long time, Kembo Mohadi, one of the top ZIPRA cadres, who has been defense minister and now security minister, intelligence minister. What you see in that is you still have a government that will probably remain intact, because all these people would have gone away and would have left and isolated Robert Mugabe, but that doesn't appear to be the situation. And Emmerson Mnangagwa, Joyce Mujuru, or whoever else, the war veterans, Chris Mutswangwa, Matema Danda, Chingadube, whoever it might be, these are people who were together in the liberation struggle. They fell out, they made up, they did all this, but at the end of the day, they will need to make a decision within the next few days whether they part ways or they combine together, because the threat from people like the opposition, MDC and others, would be such that as ZANU-PF, they might not want to open a window of opportunity for the opposition to come into any sort of government. And
just as we continue to look at these pictures, Lloyd, just I'll get your interpretation of them as well, but Emmerson Mnangagwa and General Chiwenda, obviously over the past few weeks, even months, deeply unhappy with the First Lady, Grace Mugabe, who's not in this picture. Her future would be what?
Grace Mugabe is the wife of the president of Zimbabwe, and looking at those pictures, obviously she's safe. They've probably excused her and probably treated her as a novice who didn't know what she was doing, you know, someone who's just come into politics. And obviously there's also the issue that she was probably used by those that had their own selfish agendas. Remember, as that picture as we look at that picture, there are a few people that are not there that ordinarily would be next to the president. People like Jonathan Moyo, people like Ignatius Jombo, people like Kasukuwere, You know, those were the people who had surrounded the president. Now you have the right people. You've got the Minister of Defense. You've got Kembo Mohadi, used to represent the intelligence. You've got the general. So what that means effectively is that Mugabe's government is now back. The military have got what they wanted. They've got rid of the malcontents. And remember, they never set out to get rid of Mugabe in the first place. They set out to weed ZANU-PF of all the malcontents. And the body language exhibited there shows...
And that is exactly what the general said in his statement.
Exactly, that is it, yeah. They were set out to get rid of the malcontents. And the malcontents are in prison as we speak. And
the other thing, just to add there to what Lloyd is saying, when I was talking about they might want to close ranks as ZANU-PF of whatever complexion within their different factions, ZANU-PF has always had different factions within it for a very, very long time. But they have always been able to close ranks when they are dealing with the opposition. And it is still possible to have all those G40 people back, because they are the ones with the numbers on the ground, and they are the ones with the strategists in terms of winning elections without using the power of military persuasion or the fact that you are offering security.
Gentlemen, both, thank you very much indeed for that incisive insight tonight. You are watching The World with me, David Glencross. Plenty more still ahead, of course, including doubling down on debt. President Trump saying that he's working as fast as he can to tackle America's massive trade deficit. Stay with us.